Today's episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast is brought to you by Poor Richard's Cafe and Star Local Media. Poor Richard's Cafe, Plano's oldest restaurant since 1973. They are open daily from 5:30 a.m. to 2:30 p.m., serving the three most important meals of the day: breakfast, lunch, and dessert. It is true Texas home-style cooking made with love and grit. That is Poor Richard's Cafe, located off of Avenue K in Plano. Welcome to another episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. My name is Matt Welch, being joined by Bryan Murphy and Taylor Raglin. Gentlemen, it is Thursday, so let's pull another entry from our ongoing summer question series as we continue to build towards the 2019-2020 school year. For today's entry, let's talk a subject that I think is obviously a very pivotal one every offseason. Always nice to explore this subject, but let's talk some first-year head coaches. You know, this is high school sports, so there's coaching turnover every single offseason across all manner of sports. And if it's one thing that we've kind of learned throughout the years on this job is that no two coaching situations are the same, especially when you're entering that very first year. The circumstances, be it within the program or outside the program, there's some different dynamics just all across the board. So let's just kind of scour the landscape, some 6A, some 5A, talk about some of the notable first year head coaching moves heading into the school year. Let's start the first half off in 6A. I was just trying to, see what happened within like the Allen Plano coverage, coverage scene for you and I, Taylor, and just it wasn't exactly the most vibrant year compared to like last season. We had like Allen boys basketball fresh off a state championship. That position came open. You had Allen girls soccer go to the regional finals, and then that job came open. And Plano softball made the state semifinals, and then that job came open. So not exactly a wealth of selections, in that neck of the woods. But you did have a couple though back at the tail end of football season in District 9 and 6A with McKinney Boyd and Plano West. Two jobs that it's just going to be very fascinating to see what kind of candidates those two jobs drew. And now that we're on the cusp of getting ready for football season, and you've got Joe McBride, who's gone through his first off season with McKinney Boyd football, and then Tyler Sukup with Plano West. Let's start with Sukup, just because that is a job that is going to be very much on the radar, just because of the current state of the Plano West football program as they look to try to right the ship after a 2.5-year losing streak. What has been your read on kind of how Sukup has fared so far in the program, and just the kind of the general read as he prepares for his first season at the helm?
I think he's fared as well as he could have. I mean, you can't really judge somebody based on one spring and one 7-on-7 season, but it does seem like, every time I talk to him, and obviously, he's gonna say that things are going awesome regardless, but every time I talk to him, it does seem like he genuinely has gotten some buy-in from these kids, especially kind of the rising seniors, has gotten them to view the work that they have to do and showing up every day in a little bit of a different light, because obviously, you go for 26 in a row, it gets tough to show up for work every day. It's not something that's fun to do and go get your brains beat in and then go back to practice and work all week and do it all over again. So it seems like they've turned the corner as far as maybe work ethic and just attitude and getting a little bit of a fresh start. Okay results in 7-on-7. I think 1 and 2 in their last SQT, but they were within a score in both of those losses, I think, which is a big thing for Sukup. I think that's going to be a big thing this fall. It's a contentious job and it's a tough job, and obviously, a lot's going to fall on his shoulders as far as trying to get that school turned around. But I think there's also more leash than there would normally be, because they're 0-26. Like, you can't expect him to come in and be 8-2.
The powers that be are realistic about where that program is at.
So I think the standard of success for this fall and the expectation has to just be like just bottom line, how competitive are we? How much do we run out and lose by 10, or we're within a score, or we upset somebody and come back and make a late, as long as you're in some of these games and competing and pick up a win or two, which I think is realistic. I think they could, easily go 1-9, 2-8, 3-7 if they sneak up on somebody. I don't think that's out of the question. They win a couple football games, just depending on how things shake out. But I don't even think that's the expectation. I think you just have to put a bar of, can we be more competitive? Can we actually show up and look like we belong on a 6A football field? Because that hasn't been the case as of late, especially not in the company they keep. Maybe in some parts of the state they compete at the 6A level, but not in 9-6A and some of the company they've kept in non-district and all that kind of stuff. So, I think he's on the right track as far as you can tell from the outside looking in, with not a whole lot to go off of. But like I said, it's still going to be a long road back to relevancy, I think. Because
it's going to be the same schedule that they played last season. And it's a schedule that I think at this time last year, it looked a bit more like, the wins seemed a bit more attainable than they actually turned out to be. Like, nobody foresaw Reedy being one of the best teams in Class 5A Division II at the time. Flower Mound, no one foresaw them being a district champion, and Mesquite being one of the great turnaround stories in Mesquite ISD. So that schedule turned out to be way tougher than I think West had envisioned. So that obviously didn't,
it would be tough again, and that's what I mean. Like, if they could somehow go 3-7, holy cow, that would be like, just throw a party on the West Side. That's an unbelievable year. That's amazing. That's got to be like the peak of the mountain for this year. And it's tough to say. I mean, Sugup's not going to go out and address his group and say, like, let's try to go 3-7. But realistically, if we're sitting here in November looking back on a season where they won 3 football games, that is leaps and bounds beyond what anybody can realistically think might happen. So,
who would be their best bet of beating 2 or 3 times?
I think some 9-6A teams came back to the pack a little bit. It's going to be a weird district, I think, around the board. I don't think Plano East is going to be very good. Not saying that West is going to be better than East, but those rivalry games, who knows? I mean, crazy things happen. Is McKinney for real, or was that just
West almost got him last year?
Is McKinney a team that was kind of riding the Marcus Shavers train and is going to come back to earth, or are they really upward? I mean, there's some teams in that district where I'm not saying West is better than them, but there's opportunities, things can happen. So, I mean, teams like that, I mean, obviously they're not, going to be, I don't think, anywhere close to competing for a playoff spot, but that doesn't mean they can't sneak up on some people.
With McKinney Boyd, which was also vying for a head coach around the same time frame that Plano West was, I was just so fascinated to see who Boyd ended up, going with to replace Don Drake. And you kind of heard from, from our sports editor over in McKinney, Kendrick Johnson, that there were some pretty quality candidates that were reaching out to interview for that position. So when you hear that, I mean, okay, interesting. I wonder what where they land on. And sure enough, they're able to lure Joe McBride out of the administrative side of things, out of his chair as Coppell athletic director, and back into the coaching ranks. Joe McBride, who had a very successful tenure with the Cowboys just a handful of years ago. He went 51-10, won 3 district championships, and had teams that were routinely ranked top 10 in the state. I mean, Coppell used to be. I mean, had it not been for a couple unfortunate breaks against DeSoto, I mean, there were some of those Coppell teams under McBride could have made some serious headway in the playoffs. So just when you factor into that kind of pedigree and what he was able to accomplish, his last coaching stint in the Metroplex, and with the McKinney Boyd program, that I just can't shake that. I mean, McKinney Boyd is not that far removed from being one of the most consistent things in Collin County football as far as like just making the playoffs. They made the playoffs 5 straight years not too long ago. Now they haven't been there since 2014, so now we're going on almost 5 straight years without a playoff appearance. But it's just one of those where you wonder, like, because Kendrick alluded to in the podcast that behind the scenes there was a bit of drama within the Boyd football program last year, and you wonder how much that sort of thing reverberates throughout the program and just how it affects things like your culture, and if maybe that program just simply needs a culture reset, and that'll be enough to get Boyd football looking like it did not too long ago, if Coach McBride is in fact the man to do that. But I don't know, just very fascinated to see what to expect out of the Broncos, because I'm sure that if we're right now going to power rank these teams, like, first off, between the 3 of us plus Kendrick, we're probably going to get 8 different assemblages, just because like you said, Taylor, there's a lot of parity now in this district with as much as a lot of these teams lost. So who knows, maybe this could be a case like a Marcus Shavers turnaround at McKinney, which I believe it was on this podcast at this time last year. We're talking about first year head coaches, and oh boy, I don't know what to expect out of Coach Shavers with McKinney losing its entire offense, and nope, turns around, makes the playoffs in his first year, and look at that. So, I mean, there is at least precedent to suggest that, McKinney ISD can make this thing work pretty quickly. So it'll be fascinating to see what Coach McBride's able to do in his first year with McKinney Boyd. Prosper baseball. We talk about these situations like stepping into the job at Plano West versus a situation like Prosper baseball, where Coach Carpenter hangs it up, and sure enough, Scott Holder gets to take over a program that is fresh off a district championship, 2 years removed from a state championship, and as good a job as you can get right now.
It's the total opposite of a Plano West football or a McKinney Boyd football. They've been a state contender regardless of the classification they've been at over the past decade, whether it's 4A, 5A, now 6A. We saw what they did, last year in 9-6A. Made a nice little run once again. And how do you fill in the shoes left behind by, Rick Carpenter, almost 40 years of head coaching experience, over 860 wins? Well, you bring in a guy that holds the same record as he does, the only other coach in Scott Holder to win a state title in 2 different classifications with 2 different programs. He did it at Thorndale in 2A, and then he did it earlier this decade in 4A with College Station. And of course, Coach Carpenter at Elkins, he did that years and years and years ago. And then, of course, he did it again with Prosper a few years ago, like you alluded to, in 2015. So, it looks like they got the right guy for the job. I mean, he's got a lot on his plate, a lot of high expectations, unlike a West football, McKinney Boyd football, and some of these other programs. So we'll see. Makes the playoffs. It's a good year. Win a couple playoff series, good year. It's not state championship or bust. The expectations shouldn't be that high. Obviously, Prosper is capable of that, but not undefeated in district play and then running the table in the playoffs isn't a do or die situation for him. But inheriting a program like Prosper, there's a lot of pressure. But he told me, when I met him, we spoke over the phone a few weeks ago for the first time. There's no pressure. He's just excited for the opportunity.
Do we recall how much Prosper has coming back from last season's district championship team? I try to look up a roster, but I know that Prosper's not exactly the easiest to in that.
Coach Carpenter, he was so tight-lipped about stats and just everything.
Who was on his team, period.
There were times on Game Changer when instead of a roster, it would just be number. Maybe a last name. It would be like number 13 Davis, number 34 Putnam, whatever, and sometimes it would just be number 15, number 2.
To solve a riddle to find out who their starting first baseman is.
Seriously, I was like, okay, I think that's Connor Williams. Okay, all right. But they graduated Connor Jackson. They graduated Dalton Davis and Caleb Putnam.
Luke Johnson, is he a senior?
Luke Johnson is a senior. But they graduated a bunch of guys 2 years ago. They graduated a bunch of guys the year before that, and they just relock, reload every time.
Yeah, can't remember the last time Prosper didn't have talent on his baseball program. It just seems to be one of those, like you said, that reloads easier than most. Ditto for Coppell. How's that for a transition? Coppell with Kendall Clark stepping down after their past season, and sure enough, I always like the cross market coaching carousel, because from Lake Dallas, after leading the Falcons to the regional semifinals, Ryan Howard bumps up a class and he takes over at Coppell, which you got to think on the short list of one of the more desirable jobs that you can have in the Metroplex, given just the kind of talent that program has churned out.
I would say
the D1 college kids, the pros. Coppell's been as consistent as it gets with just some of the talent that they've had, and now Coach Howard gets to try and make it all work. Taylor.
Yeah, it was definitely a move of just pure opportunity. I don't think that Howard came into this year expecting to leave or I don't even know if he finished the postseason, expecting to really leave. I don't know when the Coppell job exactly was posted or became available, but it was definitely one of those moves where he saw the posting and said, I don't blame him. This is maybe something that my family and I can leverage into like you said, in the Metroplex, I say in the state. Like, Coppell is one of the premier baseball programs and jobs that you can have. But, on the other side of that is the expectations, especially for a program that it just can't get over the hump. It makes no sense.
It really doesn't.
For a program that's as talented year to year as they are, and has had as much success as they've had, they can't go anywhere. They can't leverage it into anything. I don't even remember the last time, I looked it up when Howard took the job. The last time you have right here, the last time they even made the state tournament was in 1995. Yeah. So you're over 20 years removed from the last time they even made a state tournament. You're over what?
They've only made the fourth
that's the
round.
Regional final too. Yeah. So
one time since 2007 they've made the fourth round.
So it just doesn't compute, and I think that's a lot of the reason that Clark was, I don't know how that situation necessarily developed, but I don't know if it was a kind of a politely shown the door situation or whatever, but it makes sense because how do you not leverage that program and that talent and that community and just kind of the history into something, the fourth round appearance, just anything, and I think that's going to be Howard's task. And obviously, he proved that he can get a team there. He did with Lake Dallas, got them to the regional semifinals, maybe a little bit more talented team. They could have gone even further. And he clearly had something going from his side to take that team and really bring them together and have that kind of success, which is, I think, what got him the job at Coppell. But at the same time, it's not necessarily, I would even say, big shoes to fill. It's just big expectations regardless of who is running that program. It's just always going to be a heavy weight on whoever's at the helm of that thing until they have some sort of success. And it just, even one time, could make all the difference in the world. But yeah, it's going to be interesting. But I mean, good for Coach Howard. It's a fantastic opportunity, fantastic program, and I expect him to do well. But I don't know. Can he be the one to kind of lift the curse? I mean, I guess we'll see. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting ride regardless.
He's one of the nicest dudes I've ever interviewed also. It was after that playoff loss to Reedy 2 years ago. You would have thought they just won the state title. He was just so nice, so upbeat. Good dude.
I think that has a lot to do with, not necessarily just that he's nice, but I think that he's definitely a coach that feels like he gets his players all headed in the right direction, and I think that's what Coppell was looking for, is like, well, maybe, I don't want to, put words in Coppell's mouth as far as the athletic department and stuff, but, sometimes there is that extra benefit of chemistry and having a coach that players like to play for. Like, talent clearly cannot do it by itself and carry you to a state tournament year after year. It's clearly not just talent. You got to have somebody that
not in that region
that gets everything going in the right direction as well. So maybe Howard's that guy, maybe he's not. But
now
we'll
when you're
find
staring down the Flower Mountains, South Lakes, and Marcuses of the state. I mentioned earlier that sometimes a coaching situation can be different from others just because there's things that are a bit beyond your control, and sometimes it just happens to be you're taking a job in just a really tough freaking district, and you look at a situation like Lewisville volleyball and the hiring of Kara Sumter as their next head coach after Libby Rodriguez went to McKinney North, and she'll try to snap a long-standing playoff drought. Lewisville has not made the playoffs in volleyball since 1998, but you look at why, and it's just simply put, look at who they share a district with most years. If it wasn't, obviously they're going to be in the same district as Flower Mound and Marcus and Hebron, three great programs in their own right. They're in the same district as Coppell, but then in years past it's been with the Planos and in Allen, McKinney Boyd and the like. They've played in some really loaded districts, and you look at what they're up against this year. I just went and just tracked, went on Max Preps and looked at their head-to-head record against their four chief district rivals this season and their records, against Marcus. Since 2007, Lewisville is 3-21. Against Flower Mound, since 2007, 3-22. Versus Coppell, 0-15. Versus Hebron, 0-25. Wow. So you see, just right there, that right there is a glass ceiling that just most years, it doesn't matter. It just, you can't puncture through that just because of how good those schools are. You've got, District 6A has, they're responsible for 6 of the past 8 state championships in the UIL's highest classification between Coppell, Flower Mound, and Hebron. So when you're up against that, I'm sure, whatever, internal strides Lewisville makes as a program, might not necessarily reflect as much if the bottom line is, in fact, can you be the one to snap that drought and get get Lewisville back to the playoff just because you're in a district that is already so fortified with some of the absolute best teams in the Metroplex and some years even the state. So we will see. That is a tall order, no doubt. Having to take any sort of volleyball job, any sort of coaching job in 6A volleyball. Because
same thing with Kathy Manderson at Plano East. Very similar situation. It's Scott Sandell leaving was a weird situation. We're not exactly sure, the circumstances surrounding that. Janessa Gaddis took over, and then Kathy Manderson hired, to take over moving forward. But another situation where you don't exactly envy that job, even though Plano East is a huge program. Look at the district that they share. Prosper, Plano West, Allen even coming up. Those teams aren't going anywhere. McKinney Boyd, McKinney. Plano East. I think the expectation has to be that they're in the bottom 2 somewhere again, next year, and I don't think that's anything that Manderson is going to do to affect that or to bring that on. It's just a tough tough ask to take over a program like that.
The unfortunate luck of the draw. Because if not 6-6A, then 9-6A. I mean, the 2 most loaded volleyball districts in maybe even in the state. That is a look at least some of the first year coaching hires for a few of our 6A programs. Still got some stuff in 5A, some stuff that's more familiar in your neck of the woods, Bryan, and we can pick that up after a word from the sponsor. Today's podcast is brought to you by Star Local Media, 14 newspapers and websites with a print distribution of 270,000 homes and monthly page views of 600,000 online. Star Local Media, your community voice for news. And now, let's get back to the podcast. Welcome back. Let's continue to talk some first-year head coaches as we now look at some of the new hires at the 5A level from a handful of our markets. Bryan, you're a little quiet on the last half of the podcast, so let's talk some Frisco ISD. And of course, let's start with the original football program, Frisco High, in the end of the Vance Gibson era. The wing tee still lives on.
I was going to say, is it really the end of the era? I mean, it's another...
Although 7-on-7 might have gleaned that, might be mixing it up a little bit more than usual, but nevertheless, they promote, was it defensive coordinator?
Yes.
Jeff Harbert to take over for Coach Gibson. So, Bryan, just talk a little bit about this one and how you see Coach Harbert faring in his first year as they try to get back to the playoffs.
He is no stranger to the program. He was there the last 14 seasons. It's not like they came in, brought in a guy from Coppell or somewhere across the state or something like that. Harbert, he knows this program backwards and forwards like the back of his hand. He reassured me the wing tee is not going to go away. But what you kind of referred to just now in 7-on-7, they made state for the first time ever, kind of spreading things out. Really good skill position players. We might see them throw the ball a little bit more this year, and because there's times where they wouldn't not even throw the football at all once in a game. I don't expect nothing too crazy. He inherits a good team that made the playoffs last year, won a playoff game last year. He has to replace the entire offensive line, which won't be easy for a team that likes to do what they do with that wing tee. But like I said, they have the skill guys, they have some of the personnel. We'll see. The expectations aren't go win the district. It's none of that. Hey, squeak back into the playoffs. Good year for Coach Jeff Harbert.
How freaked out are those fans going to be the first time that Frisco breaks out, trips right or something like that?
I'm going to be at the Star, and I'm like, well, what is this? This isn't Frisco, the Raccoons? No way.
These imposters.
I'm going to kind of mentally prepare. For the first time I cover them this year, I'll be ready. I'll brace myself for some aerial attacks.
Then there was another one over in the girls basketball ranks with Lone Star. You talk about one of the best programs, period, in Frisco ISD over the last several years with what Katie Stinton was able to do with the Lady Rangers, and now Todd Monsey taking the reins. So what do you make of just that situation right now?
So he's kind of a familiar foe, or used to be. He came from Mansfield Timberview. He was an assistant there, and we've known the battles Timberview and Lone Star have had in the playoffs. So he's been around that winning culture, that winning tradition. Albeit they haven't won a state title while he was there, but he's been through the ringer and been on those long playoff runs. But he won a state title almost 10 years ago with Waco Midway. So he knows what it takes. He's been there and done that, and looks like Ray Byrne and those guys at Lone Star, they've found the guy to kind of take over for Stinton, who's now at Gunner. She's taken on an extensive role, assistant AD, and still coaching other sports. I forgot all the sports she's coaching, but someone told me, I was like, golly, Coach Stinton's going to be busy.
She basically is that athletics program now.
She is. They should just rename it to Stinton ISD. But Todd Monsey, great dude. He was already getting after it. As soon as he took over that job, and he's very optimistic. He says they should be fighting for a district title, despite losing 4 of their 5 starters, including the district MVP Adriana Quezada.
You've got programs like Frisco football, Frisco Lone Star that are a bit more on the established side of things, and then Taylor, you got Lake Dallas volleyball, girls. It was a weird year for Lake Dallas on the coaching circuit. How many interviews do you think Scott Head, the AD over at Lake Dallas ISD, has conducted over the past past handful of months is you had, positions come open for the volleyball team, the girls basketball team, both after coaches who were there for just one season.
Yeah.
So, a very, very unorthodox offseason just around that program. But nevertheless, they look to try to find a little bit more consistency with Kristen Holbrooks taking over for the volleyball program, and then Jordan Davis coming over from Marcus out in Flower Mound to be the new head girls basketball coach. Both programs kind of in a similar situation, though.
Yeah, it's weird, those two programs, as you mentioned, just because, Coach Raymer with the volleyball program and then Coach Madison with the girls basketball program. This has kind of been a problem with Lake Dallas as of late. They're looking for Michael Youngs, to put it, in a way that Lake Dallas fans will understand. They're looking for people that want to be around and stick around and have lengthy careers. I mean, even Ryan Howard was there 3 years and kind of established himself and had some success and then moved on. Even that's better than, Jason Raymer came in for a year and then wanted to move back, with his family. And that certainly is prerogative.
Oh, yeah.
But, it's same thing with Coach Madison moving out west to be with her family. So it's interesting and it's tough, and it puts, like you mentioned, Scott Head in a weird position. But it does feel like, both Holbrooks and Davis, you have to imagine that was like question number 1 on their interviews. Is
you're not going to leave me here,
do you plan on being here for a while? Is this something you see, yourself doing and building and wanting to be a part of? And I certainly get that impression. I mean, Coach Davis is very familiar with being around programs. Was around Salina for a long time. Her alma mater was around Marcus for several years, and seems like she wants to do the same thing with Lake Dallas, because it's hard to understand too, because Lake Dallas definitely has kind of that big small town allure, if that makes sense, because you have a 5A school with 5A athletics, but it's a one-horse town and a small community and very tight-knit, so it seems like a great situation, and then people just leave. So I don't know what drives people to do that, or if it's just a run of bad luck, but Holbrooks is a similar case, I think. I think she's very excited to be a head coach. And like you mentioned, both of those programs are really upward trending right now. With, the basketball team brings back, minus senior Ari Hughes, who graduated. She started off and on in place of Allie Buchanan, who was a freshman. But when Allie was in the lineup, that's a starting 5 that will be back in its entirety, for this next season. And the volleyball team's pretty similar. They lose their libero, and Bailey Vila, but other than that, they bring back Setter of the Year and Ruthie Forson, Kaylin Gunn outside, Macy Banks. They bring back a ton of people. Candace Collier certainly. So basically the rosters for both of those programs are pretty unchanged. So they made the postseason. They're not exactly state powers, but at the same time, if you're looking for a program to take over and kind of get in on the ground floor and have some success, I think both those programs are really set up to do that. So. We'll see. You got to feel like Scott Head wants these coaches to work out and wants these programs to kind of blossom into, like I said, miniature Michael Young in football. He's been there for a long time and really established something and established a winning tradition. They're not always going to the state semifinals or anything in football, but they're there every year and they're competitive. And I think that's all that, you can really expect. And I think that's what, my first impression is what they've found in these two coaches, but, we'll see how it goes.
Meanwhile, you had a situation over with Little Elm and the boys basketball team, which I'm not entirely sure how many coaching situations were more publicized this offseason than the Lobos, just because of the bizarre nature of the sequences that led
controversy, whatever you want to call it.
It led to Rusty Segler, stepping down and whatnot. But between RJ Hampton going to New Zealand to continue his basketball career, Little Elm boys basketball was in the headlines quite a bit since the conclusion of their season. And they have a new head coach, Dominique Parker, coming from South Garland. So what is the read as far as, kind of Little Elm now turning penning a new chapter in the post-Hampton era of their program?
Well, you got to think that they're kind of embracing a full rebuild, because when I first spoke with Parker when he took the job, he really emphasized Little Elm being this one school town. Obviously South Garland is not that, but Little Elm, one school town. He can get his hands on the middle school kids, elementary school kids. He can see these kids kind of blossom. So you got to think, okay, because I counted 8 guys are leaving from that very small roster from last year, including R.J. Hampton, the biggest name, and then pretty much the entire starting lineup besides Keith Miller. That doesn't sound too promising, for a big year in Little and basketball. What they've been accustomed to the last 3 years with R.J. Hampton, but you bring in Dominic Parker. He's been at South Garland for 12 years. It must have took a lot for him to get out of South. He went to South, came back to South after college to coach, was an assistant for about 7 years. He was a head coach for the last 5. Obviously, Coach Tyrese Maxey, Coach Chris Harris, one of the best duos ever in the state. They lost in the state championship game, but he comes here. It's not a team that he could have been inheriting. It could have been R.J. Hampton. It could have been Trey White. It could have been K.J. Pruitt. I like talking about what could have been to this program. There needs to be an ESPN 30 for 30 on the Little and Boys basketball program, because that would have been, just to think about that. Next year you have R.J. You have those 3 guys that I just mentioned. That's a state championship team, no doubt about it. But now here they have a new head coach, Dominic Parker, and a bunch of incoming JV kids. Yeah. I'm not sure, but it seems to me that it's a full rebuild. But with a coach like Parker, it seems like they'll be right back on track here soon with the next couple of years.
One program that does not exactly believe in the term rebuild is Lovejoy volleyball.
Yeah.
One of the most formidable programs in the state, regardless of classification, whether all the state championships they accrued at the 3A, 4A levels, and now with 5A. I mean, it's death, taxes, and Lovejoy volleyball being really freaking good. Had a bit of an odd situation, though, within the coaching ranks, though, as far as Jason Nicholson stepping down at the end of the season. And now, I don't know if the interim tag has been entirely erased from former head coach Ryan Mitchell, who came back to the program as an assistant last year. But nevertheless, yes, I guess a return to the olden days for the Lady Leopards.
Yeah, not a lot to say about it. I'm sure the interim tag fell off at some point, and they just didn't. Maybe they didn't make a big production out of it. But he's going to be the head coach. He won 5 state championships in a row with Lovejoy before he left for South Lake Carroll. As you mentioned, came back as an assistant under Jason Nicholson, who won a state championship of his own and went to the state finals twice. So, a good run from him. It's not exactly a Ryan Mitchell run, 5 in a row, but, it's pretty freaking good. But yeah, Mitch comes back as an assistant last season, and, you don't really think about it at the time. That was probably the writing on the wall, and then, after this state final loss, I mentioned that on the other podcast, just a really strange situation to lose in the state championship game, and then immediately, can your coach, basically. But, like I said, it seems like it was a situation that was kind of brewing with Mitchell coming back. He's also, I think, the girls' athletic director now, athletic coordinator, whatever they call it over there. So took on a pretty big role, was an assistant to Nicholson, and clearly was, grooming himself to get back into the mix as the head coach. And not a lot to say about him taking over. I mean, they're still going to be really good. There's nothing else to really say about Lovejoy volleyball. They returned a bunch of pieces: Avery Carlson, Cecily Braunschreiber, plenty more. They got tons of talent every single year. I wouldn't be surprised to see him, win a state title this year. I mean, it's that's the expectation every single year. It's not going to change under Mitchell. It's especially, I would say, not going to change under Mitchell, the guy that literally won 5 in a row before he left. So, I mean, yeah, he'll be back and leading them, and it's going to be same old, I would say.
They're going to share the same district with McKinney North, and I alluded to, in the 6A part that, McKinney North now has the former Lewisville head volleyball coach, Libby Rodriguez, with their program, and I'm kind of curious to see how that works out. This is a McKinney North program that has only been past the first round one time in their history, back in 2013. That's the symptom of, running up against Frisco ISD in the first round, lots of years. But it's a situation where that might only be the case for one more season. Now you look at the layout in District 10-5A, with them and Lovejoy, and you would assume, like most sports, that you could just kind of pencil those two into 1 or 2, and as was the case in several instances last year in 10-5A. So who knows what she's able to make happen within her first year there. If the rumors from a ways back on McKinney North's enrollment being on the upswing are still, if that's still on track, and if this is in fact the last year that McKinney North North will spend as a 5A school.
Are we talking a Boyd North swap, or are we talking North joins them?
It would be, it's at least the way that Kendrick has intimated that, I've been led to believe that McKinney North could end up joining 6A and that you'd have 3 6A schools from McKinney ISD. So how that would just change the outlook for McKinney North volleyball, because as we alluded to earlier on, most likely it means you might wind up getting slotted with Plano ISD and Allen, and potentially Prosper at least until that second high school out in Prosper is finished.
It would kind of eliminate the need to go off the map for the Wileys and Jesuits and those schools of the world. And when you just slot in another McKinney school, and geographically it makes a lot of sense. So. Yeah, I mean, that's a tough draw for sure, especially in volleyball. You go from the Lovejoy district to
because at the very least, because you're looking at, much like, Coach Rodriguez experienced over in the Lewisville ISD district. Like I mentioned earlier, there was that glass ceiling every year with, running up against Hebron and Flowerman and Marcus every year. And now, Lovejoy is going to be Lovejoy, but they should be able to handle business elsewhere in that district.
It's that by-district round is what they worry about now.
Yeah.
But if they assumingly go...
If they get the second seed, then that means they'll draw the third-place team from the Frisco district, which, to be fair, is probably still going to be really good.
Yep.
But it could just be, again, don't know if that's still the fact, if North's enrollment is still trending upwards to where they might be in the 6A threshold for the first time in their history for the next realignment cycle, but could be a very, very widespread landscape change, starting with the volleyball program soon enough. There's also one other coaching, new coach hire at the private school level that I just wanted to throw out there, just because, again, you talk about programs that are ripe for okay, you can make something seriously happen your first year there. John Paul boys basketball, the John Paul athletics programs period have all been kind of on the upswing in recent years, and the boys basketball team has been, they've been on the cusp of winning state before. This is nothing new for them, but they made a change at head coach, bringing in Dan Lee, coming from I believe Irving Cistercian, to take over their head coach. But he gets a team much like the Lake Dallas Heroes basketball team that brings back its entire starting lineup from last season, and that's a team that went to the state semifinals in TAPS. They had a hard luck loss to Prestonwood there in the state semis, but he's got a team that just was state ranked, one of the best private school programs in the Metroplex, with the Tott brothers, Jalen and Jawan Tott, Jaron Bradley, Donovan Johnson, the two Titan Towers for the football program out at receiver and tight end, and then Nathan Dominic, a kind of a do-it-all player who was a newcomer of the year when he played at Plano Senior as a freshman, and that's a team that is on the short list of teams that could vie for a state championship next year. So you could get some immediate rewards there for Coach Lee in his first year with the Cardinals, and that is a look at some of the first year coaching hires within Star Local Media's markets. Obviously, some others that we weren't able to get to and whatnot for time's sake, but will it be interesting to see how this all shakes out in the months to come. That'll wrap up this episode of the podcast. We'll be back on Monday for. I'm kind of anxious to see where we go with Monday's podcast.
Yeah, something different.
It's a bit of a different one, so be on the lookout for that on Monday. In the meantime, folks, you enjoy the rest of your week, and we will talk to y'all later.